The baby in mommy's tummy has something to say.
What? I had a bad feeling about this.
The baby says that he's going to be killed by Maya.
I was just about to take a sip of the tea my SIL had made for me.
Hey, what is this kid talking about?
As she raised her hand to scold my son, I handed her the teacup. Well then, why don't you have this tea instead of me? Her face turned pale in an instant. My name is Lily Morgan. I married my current husband, Sean, after a workplace romance. Sean is the son of the company's president. In the past, I never thought I'd fall in love with such a rich man's son. But Sean never acted high and mighty just because he was an heir, and he treated all the employees equally. He worked diligently, even when things didn't go well. He persevered through trial and error. I was naturally drawn to his honest and hard-working nature. Of course, many were attracted to Sean because he was such a wonderful person. However, people around us supported our relationship, and there were no major obstacles from dating to marriage. But after getting married, I began to feel a slight barrier. It was his family, the in-laws. Sean's mother had already passed away by the time we got married. His father, George, who was the company president, was also a kind man. Even when Sean, an heir, decided to marry an ordinary employee like me, he welcomed me with open arms. At first glance, it seemed fine, but the source of my troubles was Sean's sister, Maya. Sean, George, and even my late Mill in the photos seemed to live a modest and thrifty life. For example, Sean still cherishes the tie and wallet I gave him years before we got married, and George continues to use the fountain pen he received from his wife when they got married, even after decades. As far as I could tell from the photos of my Mill, she didn't dress extravagantly or spend a lot of money on hobbies. She seemed like a very ordinary mother. However, Maya was different. She always wore brand name clothing from head to toe. It seemed like she took good care of her hair and skincare, and she was always beautiful, just as you would expect from a president's daughter. Furthermore, her personality was like any typical heiress. She was very aloof, or rather, had a cold personality, completely different from Sean and George. Even when I greeted her, she would just turn her face away and ignore me. It was the same when we met for marriage introductions, and it remained the same every time we met after getting married. Lately, when I visited George, Maya instructs me to do things like serving her tea or washing dishes which she had used. I'm not your housekeeper, you know? I didn't have frequent opportunities to interact with her, so I could still endure it, but if this continued every day, it would be really tough. And so, even after marrying Sean, I continued to work for a while, but I resigned when I became pregnant. Now I'm a housewife, busy with housework and child rearing. I was blessed with Thomas, a cute, adorable son. The first-time parenting experience was really tough, and I felt exhausted every day. Still, I was constantly amazed by Thomas' growth, and watching him made the fatigue disappear. What surprised me the most was the speed of his growth since he turned 3. Suddenly, he started speaking fluently in words I had never taught him.
Mommy, it's going to thunder soon. The rain is going to pour down.
One day, I was eating lunch with my son in the living room. Suddenly, he pointed at the window, which showed a clear sky. I don't remember hearing such a thing in the weather forecast. I was surprised by his fluent speech, and I stood up and went to the balcony. Sure enough, I could see dark rain clouds approaching from the distance. With a rumbling sound, the rain clouds seemed to be approaching closer and closer, and I realized it was already pouring heavily in the distance. I hurriedly brought in the laundry. Just as I finished bringing it in, the surroundings were suddenly covered by a curtain of rain. Phew, I made it just in time. I was flustered by the sudden downpour, panting with my hands on my knees, and Thomas was looking at me with a puzzled expression. We didn't get the laundry wet. By the way, where did you learn that pour down?
Pure down? What's that?
Unlike earlier, he can't say pour down properly now. You said the rain is going to pour down, remember?
Nah, it's not me. I don't know pure down.
Thomas continued to eat with a puzzled look on his face. Occasionally, he innocently laughs while mimicking the sound of thunder. I couldn't quite grasp the situation, but I decided to chalk it up to the fact that sometimes these things happen without paying it much attention. However, after that, he fluently used words I hadn't taught him to tell me various things. Thomas told me a wide variety of things, that his dad would bring a souvenir today, or that there would be a small earthquake later, or that a door-to-door salesperson would come in the early afternoon. And the remarkable thing was that everything he said actually happened, just as Thomas had described. But when I asked Thomas about what he had told me again, he would reply that he didn't know. He would speak words I hadn't taught him, but he didn't remember saying them, and he acted as if he had never heard of the words before. I generally didn't believe in things like fortune-telling or prophecies, but I couldn't help but wonder if my son might actually have some kind of precognitive ability. However, I knew that people around me wouldn't believe me if I said that, and some might find it creepy. So, after discussing it with Sean, we decided to keep our son's abilities a secret from everyone else. One day, while we were happily spending time together, something unexpected happened. Thomas called me, and as I headed from the kitchen to the living room, he pointed to my smartphone on the table and started making predictions again.
Mommy, you are going to get a phone call from Daddy.
The moment he finished saying that, my smartphone started ringing. Surprised, I looked at the screen, and there was Sean's name. I answered the call, and Sean sounded frantic, only able to utter words like Dad, collapsed, and hospital. Surely something had happened to George, so I managed to get the name of the hospital and rushed there with Thomas. When we arrived at the hospital and headed to George's room, there he was, lying in bed with a calm expression, looking at us. I took a closer look at him, and I realized that his left leg was wrapped in dressing and suspended in the air. Thomas, upon seeing George's condition, rushed over anxiously up to his grandpa. I was also surprised and stood frozen in place, but George smiled and offered the chair next to the bed. I sat there and began to tell what I had heard from Sean about the accident, and George looked embarrassed as he recounted the details of the incident. It seemed that George had been troubled by something recently, and perhaps due to that worry, he hadn't been getting enough sleep for the past week. As a result of the sleep deprivation, he had slipped and broken his left leg on the staircase at home. What could have caused him so much trouble to lead to such a situation? I offered to listen to his worries, but George declined, saying, "I don't want to bother you." Regarding his health, he had undergone a thorough examination, and if there were no issues, he would be able to leave the hospital soon. So, as a way to repay him, I decided to visit George's home and provide care for a while. At first, George was hesitant about this proposal. He felt reluctant to ask me for help as I also had to take care of Thomas. But after persuading him that it would be difficult for him to live alone after discharge, he accepted it. George had always been kind and treated me well, both during my time as an employee and after I married Sean. My son, too, loved George dearly. So, I thought that through taking care of George, I might be able to repay him a little, and my son seemed delighted to be able to spend time with him. While George's leg fracture was not a good thing, I felt a sense of joy that it had brought our family even closer together.
Grandpa, watch this. Like this, and then.
Yeah, you're good at it.
George, I've made some tea. Would you like some?
Oh, Lily, I'm sorry. Thank you, I'll have some.
Today, too, I have come to George's house with my son. George and I were having tea, while my son had apple juice. As we chatted and enjoyed our tea for a while, George began to speak in a more formal tone.
Well, Lily, I truly appreciate everything you do. Coming to the house almost every day to take care of an old man like me, and letting me spend time with such a cute grandson. I am blessed with a wonderful family.
Oh, come on, George. You shouldn't say that. It's my pleasure. Thank you for always being so kind.
Oh, not at all. I've been working tirelessly all these years, always focused on my job, and I left everything, especially the children, to my wife. Over the years, I've started to have more free time and opportunities to spend with the family. However, I never really interacted with the children, especially with Maya. I struggled to communicate effectively. I still think I should have paid more attention to my family.
George spoke with a hint of sadness. Indeed, before I quit my job, I often heard rumors about him being a workaholic.
So, Lily, I'm really grateful to you. You treat me like your real father, even though we're only related by marriage. You've shown me the importance of family and how we should support each other as a family. I can't thank you enough, so I want to express my gratitude with my inheritance.
George chuckled, trying to make it sound like a joke. Oh, you shouldn't say such unlucky things. An inheritance is out of the question. We want you to live a long life and see our son grow up. That's all I wish for you, I said, gesturing with both hands and encouraging George. George and I shared a smile and were enjoying this moment. Then the door in the hallway suddenly swung open with a bang, and Maya entered with heavy footsteps. Maya cast an appraising look at us in the living room, as if she were looking down on us. When did she arrive? I was taken aback, but quickly composed myself and greeted her. Maya chuckled disdainfully and approached us, taking a seat on an empty chair.
Long time no see, Lily.
Her reply, though somewhat sarcastic, was an unusual response from Maya. However, after that, nobody said a word, and a heavy silence hung in the air. It lasted for what felt like an uncomfortably long 30 seconds.
Hey, what are you standing there for? Where's Mighty?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, right away. I heard Maya's voice and hurried to the kitchen. I reacted without thinking. I guess she was just waiting for me to serve tea.
So, what's up? I hear you've been coming here quite often lately, taking care of Dad.
Maya asked as I placed the teacup tremblingly in front of her. Oh, yes. I've been coming as often as I can to help out.
Well then, from now on, I'll rely on you for cooking, laundry, cleaning, shopping, and everything else. Also, can you go to the dry cleaner on Main Street to pick up my clothes? Oh, and all the clothes hanging there. I want to send them for dry cleaning too, so please take them when you go. Anne.
Well,
What's the problem? Any objections? No, thanks.
Maya said, then left for her room, carrying her branded coat and bag. Goodness, I'm here to take care of my physically challenged Phil, not to be her housekeeper or maid. Why do I have to take care of Maya's things too? It seemed that Maya had recently returned home. Since she was perfectly healthy, I thought she should take care of her own affairs. Several months passed after that incident. Arriving at George's house, I wondered if he was doing well today. While checking the mailbox as usual, since George couldn't walk long distances, I found something unbelievable inside the mailbox. It was an envelope addressed to Maya, and I was left stunned. Could this be the issue George was talking about? With the possibility in mind, and unable to bring myself to tell George, I finished taking care of him in a daze, returned home, and decided to tell my husband, Sean, about this incident. Sean seemed surprised when he heard my story. However, he just said that it was Maya's issue. I only received an evasive response. It seemed like he might be struggling to go against his domineering sister. A few more months passed, and I had been experiencing days of poor health. It didn't feel like a cold or food poisoning, and I couldn't even do housework. I lay on the sofa, and my son came over. Sorry, I'm feeling a little unwell.
Mommy, you have a baby in your tummy.
I couldn't believe my ears. Looking at Thomas' expression, which made it sound like the most natural thing, I decided to take a test just in case. And it came out positive. As he had pointed out, a new life was indeed growing inside my belly. I immediately shared the news with Sean. We're adding a new member to the family. We rejoiced together. As the days went by and my pregnancy progressed, we decided to visit George since my health had stabilized and my husband had a day off. I hadn't been able to visit George for a while, but from what I heard, his left leg had improved to the point where he could walk without any problems, so I felt reassured. When I arrived at George's house and rang the intercom, to my surprise, it was my SIL, Maya, who opened the front door. For a brief moment, I was taken aback, but Maya welcomed me with a gentle smile. I was surprised. I had never seen this side of Maya before. It was quite different from the Maya who had often bossed me around. In a pleasant atmosphere, she guided me to the living room, and in no time, tea and cakes were served in front of Sean and me.
Sean, Lily, thank you for coming all this way. Lily, you're expecting, and yet you came for Dad. Thank you. How are you feeling?
Maya was now treating me as if she were a different person. George seemed to be able to walk smoothly on his own, and the concern I had felt had suddenly lifted. Feeling comfortable with Maya, we chatted and laughed as a family.
Come on, have some this cakes too. They go perfectly with this tea. I'm sure you'll like it, Lily. Sean, make sure to remember the brand before you leave.
Maya even added a bit of humor. Wow, she's not such a bad person. Feeling delighted, I brought the teacup close to my lips to take a sip when suddenly my son said,
Wait, Mommy.
My son touched my arm. I momentarily placed the teacup down to look at him. He was pointing at Maya and slowly began to speak.
Mommy, the baby in your tummy has something to say.
What? I had a bad feeling about this.
The baby says Maya is going to make him disappear.
I couldn't hide my astonishment, and Sean gave Maya a suspicious look. Maya, on the other hand, glared at Thomas. George remained silent, his brows furrowed. The tea itself didn't seem odd in terms of color or scent. However, Thomas' predictions had never been wrong before. Moreover, now that it was mentioned, Maya's sudden change in behavior and friendliness seemed suspicious. Confused, I looked towards Sean, who slowly reached out for my teacup to confirm the aroma of the tea. Then, he took a small sip. Both Maya and I stared wide-eyed and held our breaths at his actions. After that, Sean drank a little more from his own teacup and nodded slightly.
Hey, Maya, what did you put in Lily's tea? It tastes weird.
Sean asked Maya, his voice containing an unusual mix of anger and calmness.
Heck, what's wrong with you? That kid is so creepy.
Maya suddenly stood up, pointing at Thomas, her voice becoming agitated. Our son is telling the truth. If you think it's a lie, Maya, then go ahead and drink this tea. I offered the teacup, but Maya pushed it away with her hand. The teacup shattered, making a loud crash.
Pig, that's it. I put a laxative in her tea, just like that brat said.
My son's prediction had come true once again. I couldn't hide my shock for various reasons. Did she know what would happen if I took a laxative during early pregnancy? It could lead to the worst-case scenario of losing the baby. I was trembling with fear, my hands shaking uncontrollably.
You're a nuisance.
The nuisance? I don't remember ever being a nuisance. Without giving me a chance to retort, Maya continued.
I heard you and Dad talking. He said he could only thank you with his inheritance. Isn't that right? It's absurd, don't you think? What kind of mindset is it to give away the inheritance just for taking care of an old man like you? And Sean, you too. How despicable it is to try and win Dad over to get the inheritance. I wish you would just disappear. Dad's inheritance rightfully belongs to me, the eldest daughter of this family.
I hadn't been taking care of George for the sake of his inheritance. Besides, I am his deal and had no right to inherit his estate. Whether she knew that or not, Maya, not content with criticizing just me, had even started speaking ill of her own parent. I was left speechless, overwhelmed by a mix of frustration and shock. But instead of me, my husband Sean spoke up.
Could you just shut up? You didn't even take care of Dad. You are in no position to say such things. I heard you returned to Dad's house all of a sudden and apparently reeked of alcohol every day. You don't work. You don't do any household chores, nor even care for Dad, who has helped you this much. And now you think the inheritance belongs to you. My sister is such a despicable person.
Sean, who had always kept his temper in check and calmly dealt with things, was displaying his anger openly in front of us for the first time. I guess when someone who's usually calm gets angry, it's scary. And then Sean posed an even more direct question.
Maya, I'll be blunt. You're in debt, aren't you?
What? Why would you say that?
Upon hearing Sean's words, both Maya and George looked quite surprised. Maya's debt. Sean and I had found out about it not too long ago. It was before I found out I was pregnant with my second baby. It was in an envelope addressed to Maya that we found in the mailbox of George's house. George had asked us to open all the mail that arrived and dispose of anything unnecessary, so that day, I had been in the process of opening all the letters without paying much attention to the addressees. At that time, I didn't know Maya had returned to her parents' house, so I assumed that all the mail was addressed to George. As a result, I opened an envelope addressed to Maya without thinking. What I found inside was a debt collection notice. When I saw the word of debt collection, I couldn't help but exclaim, but when I looked at it carefully, I realized it was Maya's. Maya awkwardly began to explain. The reason she had fallen into debt was due to investments. She had repeatedly made small investments and used the profits to buy luxury goods. However, she got carried away and made a huge investment that ended up in a massive failure, leaving her with a staggering amount of debt. But she couldn't bring herself to discuss it with George or Sean and had relied on her elderly father's inheritance to repay it. However, when she heard George say that he could only thank me with his inheritance, she thought she would receive less for herself. She believed that if I weren't around, she could get her hands on a large inheritance. So, she executed this plan. She had returned to her parents' house suddenly because she had no money to live on her own. Even though she had returned suddenly, she didn't explain anything to George, and she just sat around doing nothing, feeling bored and miserable, which drove her to drink. Having heard everything from Maya, I didn't know what to say to her. In the heavy atmosphere, Sean spoke up.
I see, that's how it is. Maya, you're always, really only thinking about yourself.
Tears welled up in Sean's eyes, and he clenched his fists tightly.
Well, even so, nothing happened in the end, so.
Maya seemed to become defiant and started talking. I was taken aback, but then suddenly George slammed the table and stood up with a loud noise.
Maya, what Sean said is true. What do you think of people, of family? Even Lily and Sean's children are a part of our family. To think of taking a life for your convenience, what a wicked thought. Maya, I'm not here to judge you for having debts, but your attitude towards your family. As a grown-up, it's awful. I don't remember raising you to be such a person. Pack your things and leave right now. You're not part of our family.
Just like Sean, it seemed usually gentle George had finally had enough. He wore an expression that seemed both frustrated and sad. It must have been quite a shock for Maya. She muttered something under her breath, but without taking any further action, she packed her belongings and left that very day. Several years had passed since that incident. George had gradually recovered and was living a healthy life without any signs of the fracture he had suffered, but he eventually reached the end of his life due to old age and passed away. Sean took on the role of the bereaved family leader, and George's funeral was held. It was at the funeral venue that our family saw Maya for the first time since that incident. Every time we met before, Maya had always been beautiful, but now her hair and skin showed signs of wear and tear. Her style had always been good, but her body had become even thinner, going beyond slender to downright skinny. Her morning attire looked like a worn-out dress, full of wrinkles, as if it had been hastily put together. She must have been struggling to repay her massive debts, and it seemed she could only spend money on the bare essentials. She might not even be eating properly. Back then, what Maya had tried to do was unforgivable, and I still couldn't forgive her. But seeing Maya in this state, my heart ached. Maya seemed to be intentionally keeping a low profile, standing in a corner, trying to blend into the background. She sat on the ground, leaning against the wall, gazing into the distance with vacant eyes. When Sean and I approached, she seemed to notice our presence and had an awkward expression on her face.
Maya, it's you. It's been a long time.
Sean greeted her.
Yeah, it has. You noticed me, huh?
After briefly glancing at us with her eyes, Maya returned her gaze to a distant point and weakly smiled.
I could tell. We're family.
Maya showed a momentary surprised expression in response to Sean's words, then looked at me and spoke, her voice hoarse.
Lily, in your heart, you must have been making fun of me.
Maya asked me in a hoarse voice. Making fun of you? Absolutely not. I wanted to deny it, but Maya continued.
You know, in reality, it wasn't that you were in my way. I was envious of you. I was jealous. Wasn't I that kind of person? That's why I couldn't find a suitable partner for a long time. I could date someone, but I couldn't make it to marriage. I actually wanted my own children. I was enthusiastic about having a child who would be a suitable heir for Dad, but it didn't happen. Besides, he didn't really love me from the start. So when you got married and had 2 children, you were accepted as a family member by Dad and cherished. I was envious because you had everything I desperately wanted, Lily.
Maya spoke like that, weakly laughing, and finally let out a deep sigh. Hearing all of this, I felt like I understood why Maya had treated me the way she did. But there was one thing I needed to tell Maya. I couldn't be at peace if I didn't convey this. Maya, you're wrong. Did someone say that your dad didn't love you? I crouched down and made eye contact with Maya. She looked surprised. Before he passed away, George talked to me many times. He said he was able to work so hard because of you and Sean. Every time, he regretted not being able to spend time with you and not knowing how to bridge the gap with you. He didn't know how to bridge the gap with you, especially when it came to communication. He used to wonder how his love could reach you, and he blamed himself for it every day. Your dad loved you so much. Maya's eyes welled up with tears as she listened to my words. And George left a message for you? I handed Maya an envelope that I had kept from him. It was written like this.
Dear Maya, I'm truly sorry for not being able to spend time with you and play with you when you were a child. The debt you have now, let it be offset with the inheritance. I was able to work hard because of you. I couldn't understand how to get closer to you, especially when you were a child. I'm always grateful to you for being such a good child, without making any demands on a father as distant as me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being born into my life, Maya. Even if I'm gone, I'll always be on your side. Maya, you'll always be my precious family.
Dad, it's too late now.
Maya shed big tears, and the words written by George on the paper began to blur. In the end, Maya seemed to be working hard to repay her debts without using the inheritance from George. George had already passed away, but I believed that Maya had truly turned over a new leaf thanks to him. Family is the closest bond we have, and sometimes we may not know how to interact with each other. But family is an unbreakable connection held together by strong love. Thanks to Maya, I was able to reaffirm that. So, from now on, I hope we can support each other and live as an irreplaceable family. With my husband Sean, our 2 children, and Maya,